Hey guys, Scott here. Today we're going to talk about Blight and why I think he is the best designed killer in the entire game. Pretty much, I've held this opinion since Blight has come out. I think he answers basically every problem that this game has in a very, very fun and creative way. Now, when I say Blight, I mean base kit Blight. I don't mean Blight with Rune Undying Tinker, Alchemist Ring, Compound 33, Blighted Crow, and all that stuff. I'm not talking about J flicking and Z flicking and blah, blah, blah flicking. I'm talking about just the base kit of Blight, how he was originally designed, I think is the best design that they've ever made. Because every time I say that, people always bring up like a Rune Undying Tinker. Like, yeah, you have a problem with Rune Undying Tinker on mobility killers, not Blight itself. Which, don't get me wrong, it's extremely annoying to go against when Blight's using that. But that's usually the main counter argument people make. They bring up like builds or add-ons that Blight has and not actually Blight itself. So I want to talk about Blight itself and why he is the best designed killer in the game. So back like in 2016 to 2018, 2019, you could go on any forum and you could see the same complaints. Survivors looping sucks. I hate loopers. The looping isn't infinite. There's an exploit. They got smaller hitboxes. If you are in the forum scene or Reddit scene in that whole, 2 or 3 year period, everyone bitched about looping. It wasn't everyone. It was people that were like newer and inexperienced in the game that bitched about looping. And there were some looping spots, obviously like the infinites and some god palettes that were universally just bad. And everyone agreed with that. But for the most part, a lot of people did not loop properly. They would like respect palettes and go, how are they looping these so many times? And generally, killers were not happy with the state of looping. But the problem is that was really the only example in the game of a skill on both sides. And every time I say that, people go, oh, running from God Palette to God Palette, it's not a skill. I'm not talking about like the game or something. Yes, that is stupid. No one is going to disagree that the game is like dumb. But I would say like, probably half the loops in the game have something you can do and half you just have to brute force it. Not to say that brute forcing is not really, I'm not saying it's a bad thing because part of the game is resource management and some of the loops are resources that you kind of don't want to waste. And if you do, then it becomes much harder in that section of the map to do anything useful. And then the rest of the maps or the rest of the, loops are like TL walls or like rock loops you can very quickly moonwalk behind or loops that you can use your power in or, there's something you can do about them. But back in the day, people would just complain about loops and that was it. And so it kind of pressured behavior into making an endless line of killers that have an anti-loop ability. And so it was sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy that people bitched about looping so much, which I think was the only actual instance of, somewhat skill on both sides. Again, I'm not saying it's a lot of skill, but it's the only thing that actually required some skill on both sides. And because of that, people bitched about it for so much that they just started making a bunch of killers with anti-loop. And now we're in the scenario where survivors have realized that all they have to do is just hold W. And now this is the worst shit ever because that doesn't require skill on either side. That's just being smart on the survivor side and pressing a button, and the killer has to also press a button. That is the world that I think the complaining has set us in. And I think this is so much worse. I would much rather deal with loops than just hold forward. It's just so mind-numbingly boring. Even if I think I'd rather deal with the map of the game than just like a wide open field where survivors got double the speed boost, like for a hypothetical, because they would probably end up winning on that map more than win on the game. That's how much I despise just the whole holding forward playstyle. Not to say again that it's not a strong thing to do. It's actually very smart to do. And it sucks that survivors have been sort of forced to realize this because they keep releasing killers that counter their, actual anti-loop ability, their looping ability. So that's where we're at now. Now let's jump into actually Blight. Blight is the answer to basically all of these problems. And I think that's why Blight is the best designed killer in the entire game. Because no matter what we're talking about, loops or holding W or map control or any of this stuff, killers being too weak, Blight has an answer for basically every single one of those things. And importantly, Blight also does it in such a way where it's not really unfair either. There's ample opportunities for counterplay despite being very, very strong. And I think that is one of the most important things that has to be taken into consideration when you're making a new killer. You can't just make a killer super strong and that's all you care about. You need to take into account what it's like to go against, the killer as well, because that's going to be, 80% of your players are going to be going against it, not playing it. So I think it's equally important to actually have the killer be entertaining to go against as well. And in my opinion, again, base kit Blight, we're not talking like super jacked up add-ons exploiting Blights. I'm talking base kit Blight is I almost think objectively fun to go against. I can't say that obviously because that's not what that word means, but he's like, he does everything properly. Like, you can't hold W against Blight. He already counters the most boring part of the game, in my opinion, which is just running forward. So you can't do that. Now, you can actually loop Dwight. You can loop Blight, and it's not easy really for either side. Like, it depends really who's better. Well, every time I play Blight, now, honestly, I've gotten rusty with Blight. I'm not really good at Blight anymore. I rotted my brain out with Demogorgon and now the artist. But back when I used to play Dwight, or stop saying Dwight, Blight, I used to, like in loops, it was such an interesting interaction between me and the survivor. Like, you would bounce like twice, like at the wall, and then you'd like make it to like a point where the survivor's at a window and you're about to, do your third rush or whatever. And the survivor's like, should I vault this? Is he going to go back? Is he going to keep going? And there's like so many split second decisions you have to make on both sides when you're playing as Blight and against Blight that make it pretty high skill cap to actually play as and against. I think it's really interesting, the gameplay that happens with Blight, because you both have to make, informed decisions, and you both have basically an equal opportunity to make these decisions. Basically, the better player is usually going to come out on top in that scenario. And that's what I think is the hallmark of a really good design, because very few killers and very few loops have a scenario where the better player comes out on top. It usually just straight up favors one side or the other. There's very few examples where it's a pretty even split depending on who just simply plays the loop better. And I think Blight is like perfect for that stuff. So he counters the whole W meta, but he can still be looped, but he can also counter loops depending on how well he simply plays. And I think that's very, very important. And there's also another thing that's amazing about Blight, where the whole issue of giant maps, just giant maps like Groaning Storehouse, Blight doesn't really care that much about them. He can sort of negate the one problem with, like Red Forest, where it takes, 40 seconds to just run to the other end of the map. And this is also sort of like goes hand in hand with the whole holding W thing. But Blight doesn't really care how big the map is. Map design is not that important to Blight at all. Obviously, there are a couple of examples like indoor maps like Larry's and stuff where it can be kind of frustrating to play. And sometimes there's maps like Swamp where you slide off stuff you don't really want to. But for the most part, Blight doesn't really care what map he's on, and that's an incredibly important feature to have with a killer, because sometimes you can get a map with a killer where you just go, I lose. Like if you've gotten, like Grim Pantry or Pale Rose with the artist, and you realize your birds are elevation reliant, and you can't even like hit if you're on this not on the same plane. Like there's so many maps that just completely fuck over killers, which is why I thought a map ban system would be a good idea for some killers. But Blight doesn't really care that much. Big, small, it doesn't matter. He's going to be equally good on most of the maps. And, the fact that maps are huge don't matter to him. And that's one of the biggest problems of the game is giant maps. So he deals with that. He deals with looping in a fair way for both sides. He deals with the whole W scenario. He's very strong, but he's also fair. Just everything about Blight is just good design. Other than, the bugs and stuff like that. That can be frustrating. But pretty much everything about Blight is just really good design. Now there's the thing about his add-ons and stuff. Yeah, he's got some busted add-ons. Compound 33, Alchemist Ring, even Blighted Crow. He's got some pretty busted add-ons. I don't know how he hasn't gotten nerfed. I'm not saying they should nerf it. I'm just saying I don't know how they nerfed like Deathslinger before that shit, because he's got some really broken stuff. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm not even talking about the perks you run in him, Rune Undying Tinker. Yes, that's extremely annoying on Blight. Extremely, extremely annoying. That's not what I'm talking about. Those are things you add on to the design they originally made. And I'm just saying that design itself is actually pretty good. But yeah, that's it, guys. That is... I don't know how that... We were all freaking out how that did not hit that guy. Watching this video, I was very confused by this Dwight. But yeah, that's it, guys. I just wanted to go over Blight. He is, I think, the best designed killer in the game for those reasons. And yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching, guys. See ya.